Okay, here we go. Oh, and Maya shows up. Tries to push me off the boat. Walking backwards. Woo! There you go. That's a good one. Here we go.
Right.
Good morning,
Okay,
Maya.
once again, good morning, Timothy, and good morning to everybody watching us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and listening to us in Clubhouse. It's a pleasure to have you with us again. It's a rainy morning here in Tokyo, a cold one, and we are celebrating our third anniversary today. Not the third anniversary of Japan Expert Insights per se, but the third anniversary of this podcast. So, Japanese Politics One-on-One with Timothy Langley. And again, of course, we have Timothy Langley with us here. He is not broadcasting from Tokyo today, from somewhere else. But Timothy, I'm going to give you the floor so that you can let us know where you are at the moment and what you have to tell us about Japanese politics during the past week.
Thank you very much, Maya, and good morning, everybody. Today is February 4th, 2024. There's a lot going on in Japanese politics. But this is our 156th episode. Is that right, Maya?
Yes, it is.
So I think everybody that's been on this briefing knows that we have been here every week, and it was the commitment that Maya extracted from me when we first started this. She says, you're going to show up every week and you're going to talk about Japanese politics every Sunday morning at 8:20. And I tried to resist it and come up with other ideas, but she prevailed. So every week we have been with you talking about Japanese politics. When we first started this, actually, I was not so sure that I would be able to fill up a briefing that would be of interest and maybe insight that would attract an audience long term. But boy, have things changed. And it's been building, actually. Japanese politics, the environment has been building. And we're now at a critical juncture here in Japanese politics, and I want to talk about that juncture. In fact, most of you know and maybe have attended the briefing that Maya and I did with Dan Harada on Friday at noon. We talked about Kishida's gamble, his two gambles. We should have called it gambles. When we first came up with the idea, it was one gamble, the gamble that he was tossing the dice to dissolve his faction, and the second gamble, another gamble, came up later with the state visit to Washington, D.C. on April 10th, and the possibility of having a general election sooner than anybody has really anticipated. But you've stuck with us, and it's a weekly briefing, so if you're not tuned in every week, it moves pretty quickly. And in order to address that, recently, through requests and suggestions that we've received from you, we came up with this synopsis of what the points were that we talked about a couple of days earlier, and distributed that, and we got a great audience reaction. Thank you very much for commenting on that and for acknowledging it. It's not a whole lot of work because it's just a transposition of the notes, but there are a lot of people that listen while they're doing something else. And having this reminder of what the points were and what the facts and the figures were is appreciated and deemed as really valuable. So we're going to continue that, and we continue talking about things that are interesting to you. So we open it up. This is Japanese Politics One-on-One, and today I'm going to give you a briefing of what's happened over the last couple of days. In fact, things have changed even since Dan and I talked less than 48 hours ago on the Kishida gamble. So there are other things that are going on, and I think you'll be part of the team that knows the first things first, sooner. And in fact, Maya, we have discovered as this briefing has continued that we are, ahead of the news cycle in many instances, maybe 5 days, sometimes by 10 days, we're ahead of the news cycle.
Yes, indeed. Thankfully. And that's the insider's information coming through this platform.
Right. So let me just, I'm sorry to create another, just a diversion, but I'm sitting on the ship, the Garuda, which is in Chiba. This yacht belongs to Evan Burkowski, Captain Burkowski, and even though Maya said, look, it has to be every Sunday, and wherever you are, whatever you're doing, you still have to do the broadcast. So I brought my Wi-Fi and my computer, and I've done my notes, and I'm prepared for a briefing. But that's what we've done with last year over the spring and the summer. We did a couple of broadcasts actually from the deck of the boat Santana in Chiba. So wherever I am, wherever I go, Sunday morning, it's dedicated to providing you guys an update on Japanese politics, and I'm going to get into that right now. So as we move forward, please provide your questions to Maya, and don't hesitate to come up. This is our 3rd anniversary, so come on up and either join the room and ask comments, or slap Maya on the back for having been so determined to get this thing together, or just make some comments about things that I've mentioned that are of keen interest to you. Here's the great news that's just come up. Did you know that Koike Yuriko is the governor of Tokyo? She's been the governor since 2016, a very successful governor. And in the context of this Kishida Abe faction scandal, there have been 3 members of the parliament in the lower house who have resigned, who have opened their seats up. So they're now no longer Diet members. This happens sometimes due to death or a scandal or something like that. And we have three people who have their seats are open. And in Japanese politics, they hold a by-election twice a year. And the next upcoming by-election is April 28th. And then 6 months later is another by-election to fill those seats of people who have died or they've resigned, that sort of thing. There's only 3 now, but one of the 3 is an individual, Mr. Kakizawa, who occupied Tokyo 15, one of the 32 seats in Tokyo. It's called Tokyo 15. And you might remember, because we reported on it, he was involved in attempting to buy votes and encourage a candidate for mayor of Koto Ward. She eventually won. She had a YouTube campaign, which was later found to be an illegal use of campaign, or an illegal violation of the campaign finance laws of Japan. And she had to resign. And through the investigation, it came out that he was encouraging her to use this YouTube channel to promote herself, and also to really try and get her elected in the ward where he was too. So now what we have is a seat that's opened up in Tokyo, and the governor of Tokyo has said that she is going to resign from being governor and run for the lower house in that seat. That's a bombshell. To have Koike Yuriko run for a lower house in Tokyo, definitely she will win. There's no possibility of her not winning that seat. In order for her to become prime minister, she has to be in the lower house. Prime ministers typically come from the largest political factions, or a combination of factions, and that whole story has changed now. And I think this is a move by the governor to come back into national politics, and the only reason she would come back into national politics is to become prime minister. There's no other reason why she would do this. She's 71 years old. She's prominent globally. And I think among the candidates that ran the last time, there was Konotaro, there was Kishida, there was Seiko, there was Takaichi. I think she stands shoulder to shoulder with those kinds of candidates. It's hard to imagine that, let's say, the by-election just runs these 3 seats. She runs for election and wins, and the presidential election for president of the LDP is in September or October. it is not inconceivable that she could get the largest number of votes. So that is big news. I think you'll start hearing more and more about it. You're not going to find it in the newspapers today, but I think maybe in some of the talk shows they'll start talking about it. But this is a big piece of news. The Abe faction closed its doors after 45 years this week on Thursday. Every Thursday, the Abe faction has a breakfast meeting. Everybody that's in the faction gets together and they meet. And the last time that they did this was this Thursday, and they disbanded. They closed their doors and have disbanded. People frequently ask me why and how I know so much about Japanese politics, and I think most people on the show know that I was in Japanese law school. I finished law school. I attempted to sit for the bar. I couldn't sit for the bar because I wasn't Japanese. And as a consequence of that, I found a job inside Japanese politics. I sent my resume to a member who was at the forefront of describing Japan's position with regard to trade in automobiles. This was in 1982. And he became a prominent member, and I thought he could use somebody like me. I sent him a resume. They called me up and they said, "Who the hell are you and why are you applying?" And I explained to them, and they said, "No, that's inconceivable that we would hire you." So a week later, I got another phone call, same office. They said, "The boss has looked at your resume. He's intrigued. He would like to meet you." So I came down from Tokyo, Sendai to Tokyo. I met him and the staff and essentially was hired. And I didn't know then, but I heard at the interview that there had been no foreigners that had worked inside the parliament until that time. And he was going to take the risk and take the gamble of hiring a foreigner, even with a strangely suggestive last name like mine. And he made me his official secretary. So that means I had a lapel badge. I had free access throughout the entire compound. And I traveled with the senator throughout the entire time that I was his diet secretary, working on campaigns. He was a key member of the Fukuda faction. And Mr. Fukuda's faction had only started 4 years before I walked in as a diet secretary. And Dr. Nakayama, who was the senator who hired me, was prominent in the Fukuda faction. And I joined every single breakfast briefing of the Fukuda faction at that time. It's a little bit unusual for a diet secretary to join with all the members, but I was there, sometimes sitting at the table eating food, sometimes like a lot of other diet secretaries, standing by the wall taking notes or just observing. But I made a lot of friends there, and since it was so prominent that this foreigner was there, you know, is he a spy? Is he a plant? What is he? There was a lot of curiosity, but we crossed those bridges. And so I made a lot of friends, and those friendships continue today. And that has allowed me to be familiar with Japanese politics over these many years. But in particular of the various factions of, you know, the members with whom I'm familiar, I'm most familiar with Abe faction members. I know them. Many of the members who are diet members now were diet secretaries when I was a diet secretary. And so the fact that the Abe faction has collapsed, the Fukuda faction, it was initially the Fukuda faction, it's meaningful to me because it's not just the Seiwakai, the Fukuda faction, the Abe faction, the Mr. Mori faction, the Koizumi faction. It's a piece of history that is really dissipating right now, and it cascades. It's a kind of activant of other things that are happening, just like the governor announcing that she's going to run for the lower house. So there's a lot going on, and the fact that the Abe faction is really in the hot seat. So of all of the campaign financing that was concocted, the investigation now has revealed with some degree of certainty that this began about 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and it was initiated by Mr. Mori as an idea of building up the commitment of the members and having a war chest for helping people become reelected or actually be elected when they decided to run for Congress. And as a consequence of that, the Abe faction has become vastly bigger than any of the other political factions, twice as large as the next one, which was the Aso faction. So, excuse me, you can maybe surmise that it's because the power of the leadership, the power of Mr. Abe, and everybody wanted to join. But there's other things going on there, and excuse me, politics and money go hand in hand, and the evidence is somewhat right there for us to see in hindsight. So there are the members of the leadership. So when Mr. Abe was assassinated and died, there was a huge fight to see who would be the political head, who would be the titular head of this faction. They couldn't figure it out. Everybody wanted it. It's me. It's not you. I don't want you to. I don't want to share it, because typically whoever was going to be the leader of the Abe faction would in fact be the next prime minister. So they couldn't get their act together. So it's a coalition of 5 or 6 individuals. And now these individuals are the ones who have been implicated most largely in this kickback scandal. So it's the leaders, it's the political heavyweights who have been pocketing the most money. They've already arrested the finance chief, not a Diet member, but an accountant that worked in the faction. And other Diet secretaries too have been implicated in kind of guiding this story. Several of the members of the party, when asked or interrogated by the public prosecutors, said, "I didn't know anything about this. My secretary is handling the money, and I'm out giving speeches. I didn't know. I mean, I didn't even recognize that I was having several millions of yen in my bank account. I just didn't know anything about it." So the public prosecutors, one of the issues to bring in and to really put the screws to a member of the Diet is to be involved in a conspiracy. And they thought that proving a conspiracy is too hard, so they will just go to the Diet secretary or to the finance chiefs of the various parties. In the end, as it stands today, there are 5 members of the Abe faction, the former Abe faction, who the ethics committee or members of the opposition party are insisting that Mr. Kishida hold them into the ethics committee. And it's even more dramatic than what I've just described to you. What they actually said on Thursday and Wednesday to Mr. Kishida, and actually kind of thumping him on the chest, is, "We will not even participate in the budget hearings unless you give us a list of all of the people in your faction, in the Abe faction, in the Nikai faction, all of them who have been implicated in this funding scandal and how much they have squirreled away. And if you don't do it by February 5th, there's not going to be any movement to the budget." So this is a real pistol to the head. They have to move on the budget. The budget needs to be passed by April 1st. And there's a lot of voices saying we need to have the budget sooner because we've got the Noto Peninsula disaster. We've got a lot of things going on. We need to pass the budget as quickly as possible. So tomorrow is hell day, I think, for Mr. Kishida. He's got to come up with that or get into a fist fight with the opposition parties. The opposition parties, all of the opposition parties have banded together, and they have insisted to the prime minister that if you don't do that, then this is what you're going to get. You're not going to get a budget. You're not going to get it. It's just going to be one controversy after the other. So tomorrow's a pretty big day for the prime minister, and I don't think he's out of the woods now. Other things have happened as a consequence too. A citizens group has filed a lawsuit for tax evasion against 10 members of the Abe faction, and they're going after them individually. That lawsuit will probably begin to build momentum as we move into this Diet session. The by-elections are a big deal. If you listen to Dan Harada and I talk on Friday, the central point of that discussion was the by-elections, which I just described to you. There are 3 seats that are coming open. They need to be filled. And since there is an election, it presents the opportunity to the prime minister to hold an election. He doesn't need to, but he could close down the House. So that means the 700 plus members of the the lower house would all go for an election. It's a risky gambit because the prime minister's approval rating and that of his cabinet is in the low 20s, lowest for the LDP since 2012. So he's got to battle that too. He's looking for any wind in his sails where people are going to say, you know, the prime minister is doing a pretty good job. If there was an election today, I think I would endorse him. And we have looked for opportunities ever since he's been, well, actually, ever since there's been the upper house election about 8 months ago. And opportunities have come up. They have not been taken or exploited because there was no wind in the sails. People were criticizing the prime minister for this or that, or his son traveling on government expense, having a Christmas party at the prime, just all sorts of things, and different scandals coming up. So the thinking now is that the prime minister is going to take advantage of the biggest thing that's going to be happening maybe in his prime minister's career. I mean, G7 was pretty big, but he has a state visit with President Joe Biden in 2 months. And the last time this was done was with Shinzo Abe and Barack Obama, quite a long time ago. And to be able to be sitting with the most powerful person in the world at a state dinner, I think you're going to have quite a few photo opportunities, a lot of slapping on the back, potentially a speech to the Congress of the United States. He will leave Tokyo on maybe the 8th or the 9th. The state visit starts on the 10th. If he stays in Washington, D.C. for 2 days, maybe 3 days, I would guess 3 days, the schedule isn't set yet, and he comes back, he must announce if he's going to hold a general election within 3 days of returning. He needs to announce because the campaigning for those 3 seats needs to be on the 16th of April. And that is the time when probably Ms. Koike will have already announced her intention to run for the seat. But election campaigning starts on the 16th and ends on the Sunday, the 28th. So it's about a 10-day election period with votes on a Sunday. And it doesn't generate a whole lot of energy because the elections are local elections for House of Representatives seats. A general election gets a lot of energy. A lot of people are out of a job looking for replacing themselves as a member of the parliament. It's a big deal. And the gamble is, by Mr. Kishida, after the pictures of him, hugging Joe Biden are splashed all over the newspapers, is it that gust of wind? And if it is not, we still have those 3 seats that will be filled on the 28th. And then the election for the president of the LDP in late September or October. The date is not set yet, but that is when his term of office ends. It is unlikely that he would succeed himself currently. I think everybody agrees to that. So Mr. Kishida's gambit is really approaching, and things are happening as a consequence of that. So Nagatacho is a buzz. Is there going to be a snap election? Is the prime minister going to take advantage of his kissing opportunity with Joe Biden and use that as his opportunity to launch? It's up in the air right now, but I'm kind of guessing that the vectors are pointing in that direction. Things are moving so quickly in Japanese politics these days that it's hard to predict. But as each week goes by, I think we'll be better prepared for it. The other thing that's happening is Shigeru Ishiba, who was once a candidate for prime minister, he's been quiet. He was very popular for a little bit, and then he kind of fell out of favor. He left the factions. He started his own faction, and then that went to sleep for the last 2 years. He's just reinitiated his faction. And at the same time, Noda Seiko, who was a candidate for prime minister in 2021, you might remember, has also put together a group to endorse her candidacy for prime minister. She hasn't said it as much, but she is putting together a study group in order to be a candidate for prime minister. You have to have 20 signatures of Diet members to support your candidacy, and she's getting a jump start on that. Noda Seiko is 63 years old. You might remember she's been 14 years in the lower house. She's from Gifu. Interestingly, going back in time, not too distantly, you'll remember that when Mr. Kishida became prime minister, in the race to become prime minister, there were 4 candidates. And when there are 4 candidates, there's a special kind of election. You have a runoff election, and then you have the runoff for the 2 people who survived that runoff. In the runoff, there were 4 candidates, 2 of them women. There was, of course, Fumio Kishida, Kono Taro, Sanai Takaichi, and Noda Seiko. And in the first round, Noda Seiko received 8.2% of the vote, so she fell out. The other female, Sanai Takaichi, she got 24% of the vote. And Kono Taro and Fumio Kishida both got 33% of the vote. So those 2 eventually became the 2 candidates that the LDP and members of the LDP who are qualified to vote had the runoff. So, I mean, that's a pretty tight race, 33%, and then Mr. Kishida became prime minister as a consequence of that. So you can see if Noda Seiko is in a position to believe that her 8.2% qualifies her as a viable candidate, then certainly Kono Taro is in the running too. And who knows about Sanai Takaichi, but I think she has done such a marvelous job within the LDP, and her star has risen. So this is going to be a real fight if Mr. Kishida lasts all the way until October, and we have an election campaign there for his replacement. Mr. Kishida is suffering from many tribulations. His cabinet approval is in the low 20s. There's another poll that will be coming out tomorrow. We had thought that because of his response, quick response, and his visibility as a consequence of the earthquake, which was almost exactly a month ago, he would be getting a little bit better approval ratings. He did, but very, very limited, and then they fell back down. So it's not really working for him as much as he's trying to generate, admiration for his leadership. In fact, his leadership has been suffering because of the many things that are going on unrelated to him. But even with his faction, he was the first to dissolve. And when he did it, it angered Mr. Taro Aso, who was basically his ally in running the government. So I think the friendship between Taro Aso and Mr. Kishida is poor, and with Mr. Motegi, it's always been poor. So he's got lots of headaches and not very many allies to keep things going. He has been insisted upon over this last week, since we're now in the Diet hearing, by the opposition parties to have a supplemental budget for Noto recovery. He's hemmed and hawed. He said it's a lot of money that's already being devoted there. So it's one of those things that the opposition party is just hitting him on. You didn't respond quick enough. There are a lot of people suffering. We need more money there, that sort of thing. And not only that, but what are you doing with the kickback scandal? And we want the names of those people, and your name should be on there too, because you definitely received some money. So a big fight is brewing. He's also got the names and numbers that need to be provided by tomorrow, and if not, then there's no budget hearing. At the same time, Mr. Motegi, who had the third largest faction, maybe 48 members, had a defection of 7 members over the last 10 days. So when there's when a faction grows by one person or diminishes by one person, it's big news. It's talked about in the press. It's kind of like a barometer reading. But to lose 7 at one time is it's pretty shocking. So all in all, there's a lot more to talk about in terms of geopolitics, the economy, what's going on with North Korea. But I've really gone on a little bit long today, and I'd like to wrap it up and open it up to as much Q&A as we can, because I really don't know. I'm not in a very good position to know the audience level of appreciation or sophistication in understanding some of the things that we've talked about. So maybe opening it up to Q&A will fill in those gaps and make the later briefings that you're going to be participating in more rewarding and more easily understandable. There's a lot going on, and even in your own realm of life and business, Japanese politics, people are going to be talking about it more and more, about what's going on, the dynamic changes that are going on in this economy. So you being there, you'll be up to snuff when the topic of conversation comes. So thank you very much for tuning in. Maya, thank you for building this platform for us to talk about Japanese politics. And I just welcome your questions and very much appreciate everybody tuning in. Maya?
Yes, thank you, Timothy. Well, it looks like in Clubhouse, it looks like our audience there can hear you through my microphone, but I cannot get any feedback from anybody, and I really don't know what's going on there. So if there is a problem with Clubhouse, please join us on LinkedIn or YouTube. So you can find us on both platforms under Japan Expert Insights.
That's
And
strange.
yes, it is strange. So I have no idea why Clubhouse is giving us so much pain. But yes, we have questions. A question, it is also a comment from Cam on LinkedIn. So I'm going to read it to you, Timothy. So in the US, when Congress cannot agree on a budget or appropriations bills by the start of the fiscal year, they may pass a continuing resolution to keep the government funded temporarily, thereby avoiding a government shutdown. Are there similar mechanisms to continuing resolutions used in Japan? If so, how does it compare?
Yeah, yes, there is. And how it compares is that level of controversy. I think most people would say it's impossible to happen in Japan. The consensus building, the way that people make decisions here, particularly the deadline for passing the budget. Maya,
I'm sorry. Yes.
that's okay. The deadline for passing the budget is April 1st, so it needs to be passed before then. And with the prime minister visiting Joe Biden 10 days later, it is inconceivable that we would run into a controversy. I think the bus under which people will be thrown will be packed, and the prime minister does need to come up with the people and their names and how much money they've been sequestering. The funny thing is, the Abe faction amassed 676 million yen over a 3-year period from 2018 to 2021. And the strange thing is that they announced, or they revealed, that they had that much money collected. But the statute of limitations is 5 years. So somehow they artificially just cut those 3 years. Nobody's talking about the rest of the other 2 years. But we already know that this has been going on for at least 20 years in the Abe faction. So maybe that's why it's a little bit more anger directed at the Abe faction administration. But other factions have smelled that and saw that it really didn't generate any backwash over the last 20 years, so they wanted a piece of that action too. Not as much implicated as the Abe faction, but they were involved in it too. The Motegi faction, the Nikai faction, and Mr. Kishida's faction. The one faction that was not implicated, the Moriyama faction with 8 members, decided to close its doors too, voluntarily, without even being implicated. So this push of let's cancel the factions, no more factions, there'll be policy study groups. You've got to think, how was that decision made? Decision was made somewhat unilaterally by Mr. Kishida. And how does that promote him? How does that help him? So there's something else going on in the background. You've got to be imagining that there's much more going on here than just we're taking the blame, we're contrite, we're apologizing. The core of this was not because I'm evil and because I want money. It's this structure of the factions. So the factions will take the hit for it and we'll get back to business. So I think that's part of the design. But with regard to not passing the budget, it's I don't think that would happen here. There's just too much political risk there, especially with the upcoming visit to Washington, D.C. Great
Right.
question.
Yes, thank you. We continue with the questions on LinkedIn from Romain today. So excellent briefing, Timothy. Thank you. Do you see opposition parties, notably the Japan Innovation Party, benefiting from the challenges faced by the LDP? Is there any scenario, short term, where the ruling party's hold on power is challenged? How about the LDP coalition with Komeito? Does it remain strong? Thanks a lot for the answer.
Who is the question from?
Romain.
Romain, thank you very much, Romain. It's always good to hear your questions. And thanks for staying tuned in. So, Komeito, in Japanese, the name of the party is Komeito. In English, it's translated to the Clean Government Party. So you've got to imagine they're seeing all of this go on with their coalition partner, the LDP. They've combined with the LDP to give the LDP a supermajority. With Komeito, the LDP has a supermajority in the upper house and a majority in the lower house. If Komeito decides they want to go it alone, and I think they're thinking about that the weight of being a coalition member to the LDP, if there was going to be election, is too negative. So they're going to break away from that. That would be a big news story as well. That means that the LDP no longer holds a majority in the lower house, so they can't pick all of the cabinet members. They can't pick all of the juicy committee chairs. They can't run bills through the Diet. Things would be, well, on the one hand, things would probably be much slower, but on the other hand, people who have a vested interest in seeing that certain policies are made and they belong to the LDP, that kind of distribution would be a wider distribution. But what I'm trying to convey to you here is that there has not been anything like this in Japanese post-war politics. It's just, this is shaking the foundations. And so with the factions gone, even if they remain policy study groups and they've changed the office to a different office, they've rearranged the desks, it's still going to go on. I mean, it's factions do play a vital role, but part of the roles that they were playing have been put on afterburners, and they focused on the money part of it and not as much on the other two aspects. And so, yeah, Komeito has got a lot of thinking to do there. And in my view, if the LDP holds an election, whether they hold an election now or they wait until it's supposed to be held in about a year, they're still going to lose seats. The Unification Church implicated too many other people. There's too many people that are angry about that. Ishin is really on a roll, and that is why I think the expo in Osaka is really at risk. But it's moving very, very rapidly, and just within a couple of months, we're going to know a lot of how this is going to shake out. But a great question.
Yeah, indeed. So we continue with LinkedIn. It looks like Clubhouse is not working today. So hopefully everybody who was there is watching us on LinkedIn or YouTube or even Facebook. So
getting these visuals.
getting the visuals, yes, and seeing where Timothy is broadcasting from. We actually have we have a comment about your environment, Timothy. So from Magor, and I'm going Christopher Magor, and so he jokingly commented on LinkedIn. I was wondering where Timothy was coming to us from today. Underground bunker, interrogation room, holding cell. Now I have my only slightly less interesting answer. It's a boat.
Yes.
Yes,
Well,
indeed.
I
Okay,
say it's a boat.
you say it is a boat, but we don't know. Hopefully,
That's right.
you will survive there and come back to Tokyo.
After the Koike comment, yes, I've probably got people looking for me now.
Yes, but well, her coming back to national politics is really a very clever move.
It's
Don't
so
you think?
interesting, isn't it?
Yes, very
Yeah.
interesting. Unexpected, I believe, to most of the people in the diet as well. Or maybe some of them suspected that something might happen there, but nobody talked about it. Like, yeah,
Well, the role of governor of Tokyo, the 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 vast richness and economic power of Tokyo is greater than 6 of the surrounding countries in Asia Pacific. So that's just Tokyo. That's not all of Japan. And what happens in Tokyo pretty much dictates what happens to Japan. 10% of the entire population of the archipelago lives in Tokyo. All of the decisions are made here. It's centrally located. And the wealth of not just Japan, but just Tokyo itself kind of puts the governor of Tokyo at somewhat on par with the prime minister of Japan. The great thing about the governor of Tokyo, she doesn't have to deal so much with the press and with the cabinet and with the opposition parties. She does have to deal with that, but it's not at the same degree as with the prime minister. So she's been battle tested. She was in the lower house for what 10 years, I believe, before she decided to run for governor. She had a very good run there. She was widely popular. She did a great job. Very few negatives, and so for her to come in suddenly as the savior, right? It really has a lot of appeal. And she's got licks, right? She's done this sort of thing before.
yes, indeed. And well, who knows? We might have the first prime minister in
Right.
Japan.
Well,
Um,
and we've also talked here, Maya, about the vast number of women who are going into the CEO roles, and you know, uh, Jal just hired their first female CEO. It's happening in a lot of different areas. The Japanese government has dictated to every company that is on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, you will have females on your board by 2025, and by 2030, 33% need to be women. And so you're seeing that movement. You're not seeing it much in the management level. It feels artificial. It feels like we need to do this. It's window dressing. Hurry up and do it.
yeah.
And that's uh, sounds like a slap at the people who have actually made it to the CEO role. I don't mean it like that, but it is Japan, and of all the G20 members, Japan is the numbers are just so poor with regard to women participating in government, in politics, in business. So
In business
yeah,
in general, yeah.
having her come in and be a prime minister, that would be something.
Indeed, yes. And at the end of the day, we do need role models because there are very few still there, and we have to be very. Let's be honest too. I mean, the talent pool of women in business is not that large yet. So even though the government says, yeah, we want women, on the board of every company that is listed, it's not so easy to get so many women up there because of well the number of women in business in general.
Well,
So
Maya, there's this diversity, equity, inclusion, right? That's going
yes,
on.
yes,
And I think the Americans are suffering from this too. And that in order to achieve some sort of parity, they have lowered the standards. They know that. They know that the guy who has a beard and wears a dress is not quite the greatest guy for the job, or maybe some qualifications are not met. But in order to make that overall goal, we're willing to live with lower standards. And I think that's kind of the acquiescence here, that we need to have women in, and even if they don't do such a great job as the men, it does inspire other people, and it does slowly develop that cadre of people who are familiar with it, and it sets the mind a little bit differently. I think that's part of it, but it looks like it's here to stay. I think the women will continue to make inroads, and the Japanese government is insisting that it happens with those quotas that are being set up.
Yeah, I hope so. But to me, more thing as a woman is corporate experience and managerial experience as well, and also allow them training, because from my experience here in Japan, that hasn't been a common practice.
Yeah.
So there are indeed some corporations, some companies that do that, but the majority really do not prioritize that training for women managers. And maybe that's the next step that the government needs to actually take.
Well, it's tough.
Yeah, it is tough.
I mean, it's tough for the men too, but it's doubly tough for the women. If you're going to get married or have kids, it's just the competition is so tough.
It is indeed, yes. Okay, and then we continue with Christopher. So Christopher comments on LinkedIn once again. It is about, yes, Koike-san. So he says, one of the few times my work has overlapped with politics involved a series of speeches for a conference that Miss Koike was involved in hosting. It was one of the best prepared projects I have had the pleasure of working on. I was highly impressed. Yes.
Yeah, she's impressive. Yeah.
She's impressive. I also remember her, being part of the ministerial panel in one of the Japan Expo. Well, that is not Japan Expo. That's, yes, JATA, our Tourism Expo Japan. So when we did it, and she was invited to take part in, she did a wonderful job. Just really. It was impressive to watch her after seeing, how many people struggle here in Japan. I mean, how many people struggle with presenting and speaking in front of in front of international audiences. She did a wonderful job there, indeed. Okay, and then we have.
She's I mean, she is. I think she's a great politician, a great candidate. One of the people on my team was her diet secretary when she was Minister of State, and so we're very familiar with her for operation in Tokyo government. We're not as deeply involved now that she's in local politics, but we still support and go to different conferences and parties that she has hosted. So yeah, she's a keeper.
Okay, and then we continue. We have Chitrali Parashar. Good morning, Chitrali. Thank you very much for joining us. This is on YouTube, and Chitrali writes, thank you for the briefing, Mr. Langley. I was wondering if there is a reason that Aso was able to retain his faction intact, while Motegi faced some member exodus.
This is a great question.
Major implications? Yes.
I'm sorry, I interrupted. What was the last part of that?
Does it have any larger implications?
Yeah. Read the first couple of words in her question.
Okay. I was wondering if there is a reason that Aso was able to retain his faction intact while Motegi faced some member exodus.
Okay. Why was Aso able to maintain his faction? Why?
Yes.
How was he able to keep it intact? And the backstory here, ladies and gentlemen, is that we had the blue ribbon panel, right? They met 6 times. The final time was on Thursday. He reported what his findings were, and then the diet opened on Friday. So this was highly anticipated. He had like 33 members of the LDP involved in the blue ribbon panel. after the first meeting, everybody said, we want to be in that too. So they kind of opened the doors. Everybody was able to join the closed door meetings. And when it came time to make a decision, Mr. Kishida's, and I think what was going on is the public prosecutors were really breathing down his neck and saying, we've got the Abe faction, we've got the Nikai faction, but we have your faction too. And unless you do this, this, and this, we're going to make more of a story out of it. Because he really threw so much away. He unilaterally decided to dissolve his faction. He knew the Abe faction was going to be dissolved. They hadn't made an announcement yet. But he went in front of everybody and said, the Kishida faction will dissolve. It will no longer be a faction. Taking maybe the high road and taking some of the wind out of what maybe the Abe faction would have done. But he led the charge to show his leadership. He didn't tell Mr. Aso that that's what he was going to do. I think he knew Mr. Aso was opposed to the idea, but he just let it out. He had his press conference. Mr. Aso heard about it on the internet. He didn't even have the call from Mr. Kishida to tell him what the decision was. And if you've remembered, if you've been on the show for a while, the central government has been pretty much dictated by a three-party leadership. That's Mr. Motegi, Mr. Kishida, and Mr. Aso. And since Mr. Kishida and Mr. Motegi do not get along together, Mr. Aso was playing this role, of mollifying things. The Abe faction should have been in on this. It should have been a four-person, but they couldn't get their act together. They couldn't get their leader to go in and say, I represent the Abe faction, and this is what we want to happen. We got 100 members. You guys got, 50, each. So I get to make these decisions. They couldn't do that. So it was a kind of a weird situation. But when Mr. Kishida decided that he was going to disband the faction, and by the way, you will remember that when this scandal broke out, Mr. Kishida was still the faction leader. And this is very unusual. If a person becomes prime minister, they become prime minister usually as a faction head. And once they become prime minister, in order to calm the waters down and to tell everybody, I'm treating you fairly, it's not a presidency, it's a prime ministership. So it's the members of the parliament that select the prime minister, and they can dispel him too. It's different from a president. So you want to maintain close ties with your friends and your enemies, and you want to appear to be more neutral. Mr. Kishida didn't do that. In a break from tradition, he maintained his leadership of the Kishida faction throughout the 1.5 years of the Kishida presidency or prime ministership. And then the scandal began to break. It looked like he was implicated too, and he resigned as president or as chairman of the Kishida faction. You remember that? So it's strange that he's no longer the president of the faction, but come, a week ago, 2 days ago, he decided that he's going to disband the Kishida faction. So it makes you scratch your head. Well, which end of your mouth are you talking out of? You're not the leader of the Kishida faction, but here you go telling everybody that you've decided to disband the Kishida faction. Getting back to your question, Mr. Aso said, and Mr. Motegi too, whatever Kishida decides, let him roast in it. Certainly Mr. Motegi felt that, but he lost Mr. Aso. And if you've been watching the news or seen the newspapers, they show Dandy Aso, either entering or leaving. He's got the cool cap on, or his hat, his signature hat. He's not looking good. He is not a happy camper. And so this relationship with Mr. Kishida that has been very delicately balanced has been very much damaged. So that's what leads me to believe he's not going to be able to survive until October, until the presidential elections for the LDP. I think there's lots of rock and roll going on. So you have two factions now. You used to have 6, you have 2. And of those 2, Mr. Motegi's is suffering. He's had internal problems from inception. There's there's a faction within his faction that just doesn't like him, but he is their leader, so they acquiesce to it. But once the vectors change just a little bit, 7 people leave. So in that whole mess that I've just described to you, it appears that the Aso faction is the one that's the strong, it's stable, it's consistent, it's got good leadership, and you compare that with everybody else, it's just turmoil. So I think Mr. Aso's star has risen incredibly over the last 2 weeks. Great question. I hope that answered some of it for you.
Right. Thank you for the answer. I hope that, yes, you answered the question as well. But to everybody who is watching on YouTube and LinkedIn, please feel free to write your questions there, and I will read them out to Timothy. And then, Timothy, you mentioned that there is, Mr. Motegi, he has a smaller faction than anybody else, but also there is some news that he indicated that he might allow his faction members, well, obviously it's not going to be called a faction anymore, but his faction members to join other factions while being his faction members. So it is like co-membership or something like that. What do you think the point of that is?
So there remains 2 factions. So Aso faction has not disbanded, and the Motegi faction has not disbanded. It's not quite disintegrating. 7 members leaving. It's pretty important. He had 48 when this all started. So now he's at 41. I think maybe to placate a lot of the people who are angry, he's modified his position. He said, look, you can join other study groups. It's not a marriage to us. Whereas before it was a marriage, because when you came up for election, I personally authorized you to get money to win your election. So you owe me. So that's how a faction kind of stays together. With the reporting laws now, and the way that they can't hoard money, they can't build up a war chest as they were doing in the past, very dark money. Nobody knows how much it was. Even now, they don't know. There's been some, admissions of certain amount of money over a 3-year period, but that is not the whole story. And also, there's this citizens group that I mentioned that is filing a lawsuit against 10 members of the Abe faction. They want to know, you guys are disbanding, right? You're disbanding. You're going to close the office, and the bank accounts that you have are going to be dissolved. What are you going to do with that money, and how much money is in there, and who gets it? So yes, this once again, this pork barrel politics. There is a lot of money there. They had a big war chest, and so for the factions, that's a way to keep people together. If it's only a policy study group, the ability for them to collect money as an organization dissipates. With the faction, with the Motegi faction, the Aso faction, you can still do that. You just have to report it. You have to report as income. And for the people who you've distributed that money to, which is not illegal, they have to report it on their tax statements too. This is money I received from the party or from my faction for having these parties, and I sold 80 tickets, and so I got a kickback of 30 tickets because I overshot my quota, and that's revenue to me. That's income to me. And since they weren't doing that, that's why we have this problem. So the fact that factions exist and they perform that service, it's not illegal. What's illegal is the way that they were collecting money and counting the money and hiding the money. And it gave them tremendous power to elect people or to buy votes, like it's Mr. Kakizawa, the problem with Tokyo 15, and trying to encourage people to vote for his candidate of mayor of Koto Ward. So it's all, once you've got a couple of the key elements firmly in mind, it all begins to make a little bit more sense. And I hope my briefings help you understand that and get you to that point where Japanese politics is not as mysterious, that the names of the individuals, they keep recurring. So it benefits you to know who's on first base, who's on second base, how many times they've been elected, how old they are, what their proclivities are, because they don't go away. It's not like they lose an election and they head into the sunshine. They're in politics because it's a lifelong career, and it's in many instances hereditary. So I appreciate the interest.
Yes, so we have a couple of other comments and questions on LinkedIn, but I want to read one that just came up from Hiroko-san, because we're talking about the factions and also Aso. So she wrote, after what Aso said about Ms. Kamikawa, the
Yes.
Minister of Justice, I wonder how he can keep his status as a congressman. So
Okay. Should we talk about that? Hiroko, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
oh, yes, it's nice to hear your thoughts on this,
Yeah.
because he has had a lot of such moments. Not only this time, his words about Miss Kamikawa, but he has had a lot of other
Oh, you're
full
talking
power.
about Aso in general. Yeah,
So
sure.
in general, yes, but even today with this latest one, he's still in Congress, he's still in the Diet, and it looks like he will keep that status of his. How does it happen? Why?
No, I don't think what he said about Kamikawa as foreign minister diminishes or disqualifies him as being a deputy prime minister. I think what he was saying was a slap at Mr. Kishida. That's what it was aimed at. Miss Kamikawa is
Mm-hmm.
the foreign minister under Mr. Kishida. She replaced Mr. Hayashi when he became chief cabinet secretary. He was the foreign secretary. He was the foreign minister. And she came in, and she has been on a rocket. She's spent so little time in Tokyo. She's been all over the world, scoring high marks. And I think what the prime minister said was a slap at Mr. Kishida, who was the longest serving foreign minister, you'll remember, under the Abe administration. And his comment was somewhat like, she is probably the best foreign secretary, foreign minister that we have had, far surpassing whoever we had, during the Abe administration. So it did raise a lot of eyebrows, but I think it was directed to insult Mr. Kishida. There is bad blood there, without a doubt.
Well, okay.
Hiroko wants
Thank
to add more to that.
Well, Hiroko-san, if you feel like adding anything to this, please, let us know on LinkedIn. And then I'm moving back to a question from Frederick Gandlach. I hope that I don't mispronounce your name. Apologies for this. Okay, the question is, Timothy, is there any indication that the weaker opposition parties are ever going to get their act together and be a viable opposition?
So that's a great question. If there ever was an opportunity, now it is that opportunity. They are forming battle lines with regard to what's going on with the Kishida faction, how much money was there. We want names. So they have banded together to insist on that. And they have banded together to say, as a group, we will not participate in the budget hearings. Excuse me. Even if they say that, though, the LDP still has, with the Komeito, enough votes to pass the budget, even if the opposition party refuses to participate. It would create a long-term problem for the LDP moving forward, so it's unlikely that would happen. But if they can bind together on one issue, it's possible, since they've been working together, they've been having meetings, sometimes dinners together, that they can form bonds to have other similar opportunities to band together. And that's been the problem. They just haven't, they've been fighting with each other. They don't like each other. They fight on policy issues. And philosophically, they are different. They aim for different things. So it is hard for them to come together. But I think under the leadership of perhaps the Constitutional Democratic Party and Ishin, if you could mend that, that would be a powerful force. So there's been a lot of discussion about that. And there has been some progress in recent elections where Ishin has made inroads and has horse traded with other opposition parties. They've done it skillfully. It has helped them. And I think after it's happened once or twice, people have had second thoughts and say, this hasn't benefited us. It benefited them. So they've just turned around and made hay. And here we are sitting out, in the wind. So there's history there too. But yes, if there was an opportunity, the diet is now full of people who are independent from factions. They can go to join different study groups. They can bind with other people who have similar positions on a different policy issue. So I think that it's rock and roll. It's like you're making a stew now, rather than a 4-course dinner. A lot of energy is going to be poured into this. It's going to be shaking out, and it won't settle down for a couple of election cycles, I don't think. But it's a great time to be familiar with what's going on in Japanese politics, because there will be a lot of change.
Right. Okay. Yes. Thank you for that. And Rick, thank you for letting me know that I didn't mispronounce your name, and for letting us know what your nickname is. We're happy to have you with us on LinkedIn. Okay, and then Hiroku says we're going back to Kamikawa-san and the comments by Aso about her. The response by Miss Kamikawa was great. I wouldn't be able to stay as calm as her. Okay, yes.
She is
All
a cool cucumber.
She is, and yes, I think that she's got a lot of experience, and I believe that she also knew what it meant. I guess that the comments were not a jab at her, but they were really directed indirectly at the prime minister, probably. Yes, okay, and then there is another comment from Tim Sullivan. We have it. He said, I don't know about lowering standards. He's talking about women in business. So I don't know about lowering standards to fulfill women in leadership quotas. Maybe I misunderstood Timothy. But anyway, here is my counterintuitive take. If Japan's corporate world were truly a meritocracy, Japanese women would absolutely dominate in leadership roles. And by doing so, they would actually raise the standards, not lower them. That said, I don't believe in quotas. I believe in equal opportunity to compete for equal access to education, training, etc. But outputs should always be based on competence, which makes me old school. As I said, in such an equal access world that doesn't yet exist, Japanese women would dominate. Yes, thank you, Tim, for sharing your thoughts about this. Okay.
Most foreign companies who have come to Japan are always confronted by this HR issue, how to hire people. The good people that you want, they're already employed. And the only way to get them is to raid them from other companies. That's hard, it's expensive, it takes time. And I think the vast majority of foreign companies who have come to Japan have realized women are better at doing this. They're more, they're better educated. They're easier to work with. They don't carry a lot of baggage that the men do. And so I think equal opportunities, as you said, Tim, for women is higher and better in the foreign companies. But yeah, lowering standards, I think I was speaking from the perspective of what the Japanese men are saying. We can't have the women there because she can't. Of course, we've got 100 reasons why, a woman isn't going to be the best person to do that kind of job. So I think it just goes on endlessly, and I think it's unfair. And let's hope it begins to gain some more traction.
Yes, let's hope so, because again, from my personal experience, this hasn't been the case so far. Yeah. All right, great. So I am watching, LinkedIn and YouTube, but it looks like we have gone through all the comments and questions there at the moment. So I think that I saw something from Rumiko on LinkedIn, and I'm trying to find it, but it's really difficult because, okay. Oh, okay. So here we got it. So thank you very much, Timothy. If it is relevant, may I have a bit of base touch on
Touch
Ishin?
base.
Touch base on Ishin related to the diet. So
Okay.
Ishin is very confusing to me because, well, it seems to be made up of Osaka locals. So maybe you can expand a little bit on this.
Yeah. Initially, yes, Ishin did start in Osaka. They had a great start there. They've got some very powerful leaders there who initiated this break from, the dominance of the LDP. So they started their own political party. It started very slow, but they got the governor, they got the mayor of Osaka, they got all of the seats of the Osaka assembly. They've been on a roll and they're expanding. So they have done a good job in Osaka and in surrounding prefectures. And now their objective is to go national. So they do have Ishin candidates in other election districts, in Chiba, for example, in Tokyo. And so the idea is, if you listen to Mr. Baba, who's the chairman of Ishin and also was a colleague of mine when I was working in the parliament, he worked in the same office as me. His idea is, leap, jump, sprint. So it's a coalition of candidates. So get the candidates to challenge LDP seats, and then support them, and have them further out into the various metropolitan areas like Sapporo or Sendai, Chiba, different places like that. And they are making inroads there. So they are the number 2 opposition party. The Constitutional Democratic Party is about 30% larger than they are, but they are making more inroads than the Constitutional Democratic Party. They're vibrant, they're young, they're outspoken, they've got some great candidates there. So I think there's a lot to be said for Ishin. You just need to keep your eye on it. There will be changes.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And well, Timothy, I know that you're eager to go, or at least to have another cup of coffee today. So thank you very much for the briefing. Thank you very
You read
much.
me so well.
Oh, do I? That's good.
Yes.
Okay, yes, that's good to know. Great. So, well, with this, I think that we can
Thank
let
you.
everybody go. Yes, thank you very much for the briefing this morning again. Uh, I also hope that the weather where you are will get better so that you can eventually get on board, not in cabin or however you call it. Yes, and that you can work. I'm sure that Evan will be happy with your help there. And so hopefully at some point, you'll be able to sail, maybe if not this week, then next week. And yes, to everybody who wondered where Timothy was today, he is on board of Mr. Captain Burkowski boat, broadcasting from there, and probably you will be broadcasting from the same boat next week again.
Next week is a 3-day weekend, followed
Right?
by another 3-day weekend.
Mm-hmm.
So February is coming to a rapid close, even though today is just the 5th to the 4th.
Yes.
And then we're into March. March is, cherry blossoms. Then the visit of Prime Minister to state visit to Washington D.C. So there's a lot coming up.
There is indeed. Okay. So thank you very much again. This is all
Thank
for
you very
today.
much, Maya.
We'll be here once again on Wednesday at 8 o'clock with Tim Sullivan and Binati Shet, when we are going to talk about a very fun topic, which is emoji in different cultures. That's going to be our 3rd anniversary for the Wednesday morning podcast. And also next week again at 8:20 Sunday with Timothy here. So thank you very much for watching us, Timothy. Please put your best smile on.
Without a cup of coffee, it's just
It's just
too
difficult.
daunting.
Okay, so then I'm going to, well, salvage the situation with this.
Thank you.
Okay, see you next week. All of you, thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Maya. See you
Thank
next week.
you.